This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on challenges at COP-26 summit. The participants are Dr. C.K. Varshne, environmentalist, and Sanjay Jha, journalist.
12 years ago, at a United Nations Climate Summit in Copenhagen, rich nations made a significant pledge. They promised to channel $100 billion a year to less wealthy nations, developing countries, by 2020 to help them adapt to climate change and mitigate further rises in temperature. Now we are just a few days ahead of the global summit COP26, which is going to take place in the Scottish city of Glasgow. The focus seems to have again turned to climate finance. Countries are going to argue for more money to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. And this important place before the upcoming climate change conference, it seems to have not been met, and money is not sure to be available before 2023. Professor Vasne, what do you think about the intent of the rich and industrialized nations for not fulfilling this important commitment?
I think that, as you have rightly said, that $100 billion were to be provided by the rich countries to the poor developing countries to really meet their adaptation as well as adopt means of containing carbon emission to maintain the temperature within the Paris Climate Agreement, that is below 2 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade. Now, this commitment has not been met very clearly, and the developed countries are dragging their feet, which is shaking the confidence of the global community about their seriousness of their commitment as well as of the implementation, what they really pledged for. We have seen that for quite good period of time, America was really out of the Paris Agreement. Now they have joined. But this kind of a behavior really shakes the confidence of the global community. I must say that there are lots of problems with whatever they have committed because they have not decided which country is going to contribute how much. So I think it's a very fluid and they don't seem to be very serious. Let me also mention that $100 billion is a minuscule amount. In fact, the developing countries, if they have to adopt and if they have to confirm their energy use as per the Paris Agreement objective, then trillions of dollars will be needed. However, if they have really met their commitment, it would have really given some kind of a confidence and encouraged them to really provide more aggressive commitments to put on the table at the Glasgow. Failing which, it seems that there are all kinds of issues which are really blocking this kind of commitment which they have. Very recently, Canada and Australia have announced that they will not be able to meet their $100 billion commitment at Glasgow. And they think that this will be possible for them only by 2023, which means there is going to be a delay of 3 years, even for this $100 billion, which is absolutely minuscule for taking care of the aggressive commitment that they expect from the developing countries and the world community.
As you said that this obviously the developed country have failed to fulfill their promise, and that is leading to the frustrations. So frustration at this failure by the rich nations could be contributing to rising tensions ahead of crucial climate summit taking place in Glasgow. Now, negotiations will be obviously focusing on raising even more money after 2025 because 100 billion is not nearly enough, as we know, because this was just a starting fund to get developing countries to poor countries to commit to the global, to cut the carbon emissions in their respective countries, and also to help these countries to achieve their national climate commitments. Do you think in this scenario, the countries who are going to be asked or rather forced to commit to these, they will be sort of giving more commitment?
No, I think that is not seems to be the case because they have already announced that they will not be able to meet their commitment. And it is only after 3 years, possibly they will be able to really meet their commitment, which completely really shows that how lightly they have taken their pledges. And once you have this kind of an attitude, I think it weakens the willpower and the country's commitments to place more aggressive targets on the table on a meeting like this. So COP26 is going to be first thing where the climate financing will be discussed. And the other important point that one must remember is that the accounting of the fund that they are talking about is also in doldrum, is not very clear, and they are trying to interpret in a very, very interesting and a funny manner. There are three kinds of financing that is available: bilateral, multilateral, export credit, and private finance. And whatever has been so far given is actually the bilateral finance, and the multilateral finance component is very small, and rest of it is export credit, which is really not the grant or the money that they are really committing for, but it is only some kind of a, I should say, borrowing kind of a arrangement that they are really talking about and putting the whole thing as the money that they have really provided for. So I think there is a lot of difficulty with respect to the accounting of this money. How this is going to be distributed is not very clear, and therefore all these things are to be straightened out. And in fact, what one was expecting, that at the COP26 at Glasgow meeting, the developed countries will come voluntarily and say that this is how we are going to further enhance the kind of commitment that we have made. The adaptation fund is very important because the developed countries are suffering on account of the emissions that the developed countries have so far been doing unabated. And as a result, they are suffering. You know, the recent report has come where India has suffered billions of dollars of damage because of the climate change that we are experiencing. You have seen the kind of flood that has happened in the north. You have seen how the Kerala is suffering from the recurring flood fury year after year. And you can see that many coastal states and particularly the Pacific islands are really suffering a great deal. And all this is really undermining their infrastructure, which they have been able to create, and also really taking up the life and the livelihood of the people. So I think all these things require money, and therefore the kind of preparedness or the kind of gesture that was expected is absolutely wanting. And at the same time, we find that they are backtracking on their pledges that they have made. So unless these pledges are adhered to, sincerity will not come, and thus we are not able to create a climate which has to be created in order to really contain this global warming and the climate change issue, which is so serious and which is so, I should say, has got ramification and consequences for the future generation and well-being of the people.
You spoke about the challenges for the developing countries. India, which is a very, very important player as the second most populous country, the third emitter, and India has again reiterated that efforts to avoid emissions during the development process are tied to the availability and level of international financing and technology transfer, since most of the developing countries still face complex developmental challenges. Speaking at a Middle East conference, Indian Environment Minister has clearly said COP26 must deliver concrete action plan on climate finance and technology transfer. Otherwise, this whole summit would not achieve what it is intended for. What do you think India should be talking about?
No, I think India is very clear that it is an issue which requires immediate attention as well as commitment by the emitters of the warming gases and the kind of the legacy emission that they have. They need to change their lifestyle dramatically and come forward to show and suggest that how in a time-bound manner they are going to contain the emission of warming gases from now on in a very rigorous manner and in a very significant quantity. Unless that is there, it will not be possible for any one country to do enough. India has been very, very straightforward and taking very forward-looking decisions. We have got Global Alliance, which ultimately also got the UN, I should say, approval. And for that, India has also proposed one sun, one world, one grid. Now, this kind of a proposal is something which requires commitment from the countries. For this, as it will have a great impact in reducing carbon emission. But this requires capital investment. And for that, again, finances are needed. And therefore, it is time that this proposal, which India has been proposing, must also be financed. And countries must forward to provide the necessary finance for this so that a clean energy permanent source may be available, because sun shines all the 24 hours, but in some places it is dark and some places there is a sunlight. So one can really compensate from one area to another if we really see that one sun, one world and one grid concept gets implemented, and it is really gets the support as well as the required financing over a period of time to make it happen, and as a viable alternative to the fossil fuels that are being consumed in larger and larger quantity. So I think you have mentioned that India is third emitter, but I think it is important for us to know that our total contribution at present is only 7% out of 100. So I think although we are third, but the difference between the second and the third is a huge. And also, if we take per capita emission of carbon dioxide, then we are well below the global average. So I think all these things have to be said along with this when we say that we are the third largest emitter. In fact, look at our population and look at the developmental stage. We have not really used any of the carbon space which others have already utilized, and have left very little for other countries to make use of. So I think here is also a question of carbon justice or environmental justice that is really required, to which the developed countries must come forward and actually provide space by making deep cuts in their own emission. Instead, they are talking of net emission or net zero. Now, this is something which means that they should continue to emit as much as they are doing now, except that they will not really add any further. And that is not a very happy situation. So I think these are some of the things which we have to be very careful. And without making any commitment of net zero, I think we should really insist of commitments and deep cuts into the emission by the developed countries, and also enhance the stepping up of the financing for the developing countries to really invest in their adaptation to make up for the losses that they are suffering because of the global warming and climate change that is taking place.
We discussed about the challenges with the financing of this. We have also seen the developed countries are deterring from technology transfer. One can understand the money part, they are not yet contributed. But if they're really serious about cutting carbon emission in the developing and poor countries, what is stopping them from necessary technology transfers to these countries?
So I think they are very serious about it. They just don't want to really commit anything on this account. This is very simple and straightforward. For a simple reason that in this meeting at Glasgow, like many other meetings earlier, there are people from industry and they have a lobby. And this lobby doesn't really allow this kind of a thing to happen, because then they say that innovation and the incentive for innovation for more important technologies to come for reducing carbon emission will not take place if we do not keep this as an important consideration. So I think this question of giving up the patents and giving up the technology transfer free of cost for the developing countries freely and happily doesn't exist. I mean, this kind of a thing is very cautiously guarded through the negotiating, I should say, somersaulting and all kinds of diplomatic maneuvering. So I think these are the considerations which are really holding them back to commit on these, because they are the one which are going to also not completely sacrifice the interest of their industry. And thus we find that there are serious issues about it, and it is an issue which is still waxing and will continue to be discussed.
Hope and we pray that rich nations, industrialized nations, should contribute and fulfill their pledges so the world can become a safer and better place. Thank you for your time, Professor Varshney.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on challenges at COP-26 summit. The participants were Dr. C.K. Varshney, environmentalist, and Sanjay Jha, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio.